this presentation, I would like to do 4 things. I would like to talk about the Brazilian context and the results of the study oh so quickly. And then I would like to focus on things we know about quality, 5 lessons, and then finally how we might go about addressing, indeed, the challenge of quality. So the first is the context of Brazil. The study itself is quite remarkable. As you know, it was designed to do 3 things. The first was to assess the quality of the settings in which young children find themselves, and we have heard a great deal about that. The second was to measure the impact that attendance has on young children's development, and we will hear more about that. And the third was to describe the policies and the practices that exist in 6 of your capitals. The findings are quite remarkable. First, indeed, we see that the overall quality for young children is actually quite low, that 72.4% of the children fell within the categories of inadequate and basic, I should say the settings in which the children are located. What this means is that Brazilian children are having experiences that rather than necessarily advance their development, which is our goal of early education and preschool, these children are in settings that may actually compromise their development. Often, when we conduct comparisons using the ITERs, which was used in the creches, and the ECHERs, which was used in preschool, we find that the scores on the ITERs, or the scores for infant and toddler children, tend to be much lower. That is true in countries around the world, and Brazil is indeed no exception. What is an exception, and what is very important for you, is to note that the differences in the percentages that are in the low range for infants and toddlers, in particular, indicate that we need a good deal of work. Indeed, it is a very sad reality for Brazilian children that about half of the settings in which they are located are considered inadequate for children's development. I want to say that while this is something that we should be concerned about, it is also wonderful that we have this information and that we can improve upon it. The results also indicate some very important things, looking at it from the positive side, that indeed when we see high quality settings, usually there are a number of things that happen together. There is better infrastructure, the children are experiencing good use of the media, there is better access to the transportation of children to school, the director's salaries tend to be higher, the teachers were younger, which is good news, not so good news for some of us who are older, that many of the activities are available to children on a daily basis, and indeed that the good quality settings tend to be located in neighborhoods where there are other advantages. There are similar findings that happened with the preschool. Good things cluster together. We have better infrastructure, we have more equipment there, we have directors who promote preschool training for their teachers, and indeed we have directors who face fewer difficulties in relation to the resources that they have to work with the children. We have directors whose salaries are better, and indeed we have teachers who hold postgraduate certificates within the area of education. So the good news is we know what things help to produce quality. The results from the impact study are outstanding. they need to be regarded with some caution, because in one case, we have the timing of the data. The data were conducted on children who are currently in the settings, whereas when we look at the impact data, that looks retrospectively. So we are comparing two different time periods, which is a little bit of a challenge. The other challenge that is very important to us in early childhood is that when we look at the results for how children are performing in school, we are not looking at all of the domains of development. The data are focused in a limited number of areas, and for those of us concerned about the development of young children, we want to be sure that social emotional development is captured, that physical and motor development is captured. So the results from the study, particularly the impact part, we need to take a look at. The first lesson relates to the effect of primary schools. So that while we know it is important for children to have very good experiences when they are very young, when they are 3, 4, and 5 years old, and infants and toddlers, we also know that a great deal of the difference between how the children performed really related to the effect of the quality of the primary schools. So primary education is as important as is early childhood. The second major lesson that we learned is that roughly 9% of the difference of the results was due to the preschool effect. So it's not just that schools are important, but that the effect difference was very important for preschools. And finally, when we combine the preschool and the school effects, we see that about 3% of the difference between the results of the children was actually due to the preschool effect, 15% to the primary school, and about 80% to the differences between pupils. That's to say that children will always vary, but that preschool and schools are very important to their development. The results of the study are important because we understand that there is about 2% of the difference that is related to the pupil results. On the other hand, we need to be very cautious because some of these data are what we scientifically call correlational, that is, they happen at the same time, but they may not be causal. And so I think the data are very important to understand, and we can draw important conclusions from them. So what are the most important conclusions? Well, first of all, it is clear that we have a quality challenge in Brazil, as we do in many other countries, and that, in particular, the challenge is very great for infants and toddlers. Indeed, we also know that the quality of the preschool settings is precariously low for some children. And finally, we know that children, and we know this from studies internationally, that when children are in poor quality environments, environments that do not enable them to make the kinds of gains that we know that good quality settings can provide, we understand that sometimes the gains of preschool will not be sustained as children move forward. Quality is the most important variable in assuring that children will make progress. So having the results of this very important study, what is it that we know and what is it that we can do about quality? The first lesson that we know is that quality matters a great deal. It matters to students who are in high school, to students who are in middle school, but it matters particularly for children who are very young and often very vulnerable. We know that a great deal of the brain develops by the time children are age 3 and that 90% of it develops by the time they're age 5. We also know that young children grow faster in the early years between birth and age 5 than they do at any other time of their life. We know they are more vulnerable. We know they are more impressionable, and consequently, the impact of quality on them is so much greater than it is for children who are older. Indeed, children without quality settings cannot progress to develop their full potential. So that is lesson one. Lesson two. There are very different ideas about what constitutes quality. Most people, or many people, have believed that quality is objective. It is clear, and it can be measured very, very accurately. Indeed, the people who created the ITERs and the Eckers instruments had that notion. They said there were certain variables, and if you met those variables, you would have a high quality setting. It is also true, however, that there is what is called a postmodernist stance on quality that says that quality has many faces. That quality may vary depending on the child's background, on how the child learns, on the nature of the culture from which the child comes. The quality definitions vary a great deal, and indeed, we need to take that variation into consideration as we are talking about quality. Indeed, many of us believe that these two perspectives, we can combine these two approaches, that they are not as different as we have thought. The third lesson, there are many, many variables that contribute to quality. For years, we have thought that there primarily were four. The first was the class size, or the number of children in any one group. The second was the qualifications of the teachers. The third was the balance, the teacher-child ratio. And the fourth was the nature of the curriculum. And indeed, if we look at model programs, programs that have been shown to demonstrate very important effects on young children, not simply while the children are in the program, but over time, and effects that actually prove that investing money in young children saves the society a great deal of money in the future, we understand that indeed they all adhered to these principles of quality. That is, they had appropriate class sizes, they had teachers with very high qualifications, they had good teacher-child ratios, and they had practiced curriculum. The point of this is that if we want results that are sustained over time and that save society money, we know unequivocally from many research studies, not just from one, but from many, that there are things we can do to improve the quality. Indeed, we know also that other things matter, and your work has proven that. But there is one thing that all of the studies have found that is absolutely the most important. It is the nature of the way the adult interacts with the child. Indeed, preschool has a profound effect. The last lesson about quality preschool, we also know that in many countries, my own included, that often policymakers believe that if you fund access to preschool programs, if you simply get children into the door, that you have done enough. Indeed, policymakers do not necessarily understand that simply getting children to preschool is not enough, that the settings that preschool children in which they are enrolled must be of high quality, or else the investment will not pay off. It is our job to help make policymakers understand that access alone will never produce the kinds of outcomes that they and that we, that parents and that our society hope for. Those 5 lessons are firm, and they exist across the world. Now, what can we do about it? How can we address the quality challenge? Would you join me in thinking about a beautiful garden? This is Froebel talked about the kindergarten for children. Yes, this is a beautiful garden. And in this garden, we are planting programs for children. You in Brazil have done a magnificent job of creating many programs meant access for young children. But there is a little problem. You all know that if you plant many, many, many flowers in a garden without watering the flowers, without there being nutrients in the soil, without there being good sun, what will happen to those flowers? Too many flowers without any nourishment will die. Yes? In many countries in the world, by focusing only on access, by creating the programs, but not by enriching the infrastructure or the soil in which the flowers grow, we essentially are creating programs that do not have the hope of producing the kind of benefits that we need. So we like to say that in order for programs to really matter, we need the individual programs, or the flowers, and the access, and we need the infrastructure, or the rich soil in which those flowers grow. And when we have good access, good programs, and when we have good infrastructure, then we create quality. Now you are probably thinking, what does she mean by infrastructure? That's such a complicated word. There are 8 things that come together to make high quality. Do you remember when I was talking about your study and we said that there were many things that come together that characterize quality? So it is when we are creating quality programs. Indeed, and the reason that I used gears, although it's not a good metaphor when you are talking about growing flowers, is that I wanted to show that you need them all working together. Let me talk about what they are, but before I do, there is a formula. And it says 8 minus 1 equals 0. And I ask you to remember this, not because I can't subtract, but because if we take away any one of those gears, any one, it is impossible for us to create quality programs. Yes? Yes? Yes, okay. What are they? What are those 8 gears? What is magic? The first gear says that if you are going to have a quality program for very young children, you must provide very rich learning opportunities. The settings must have a great deal of language. Communication between the adults and the children and amongst the children themselves is a very important priority. Children must be actively engaged. Sitting at desks for very, very young children is not what we would call the ideal learning environment for very young children. Indeed, children must be in environments that are characterized by inquiry, where they are encouraged to ask many questions, even if they're silly questions. Children need opportunities to reflect. They need opportunities to demonstrate their curiosity. And indeed, very importantly, children's own culture must be respected. The literature, the customs, and the families. So the first gear is we have to create quality settings for very young children. The second gear is regulation. Now, this sounds like a government bureaucratic term, But indeed, we do need to make sure that there are minimum levels for children's health, for children's safety, and that those minimum levels or requirements are strongly enforced. Every single study that has ever been done, every study, looks at the quality of the regulation, and based upon the regulation, can predict the quality of the setting for young children. So government regulation is very, very important. The third gear is money, is financing. Indeed, it is very challenging to procure adequate funds for young children, and we heard that this morning. On the other hand, if you believe in the power of the early years, then there is no investment that is any better than investing in early childhood education. It will have the power to recontour a society. We need to make sure that the monies are well spent. We need to make sure that we are accountable in the way we spend the monies. But you can be assured from all the data that this kind of investment really pays off. The fourth gear is the way we govern or make sure that the programs work together. It is very important that it is clear who is running the programs at the country level, at the municipal level, and at the local level. Indeed, a good governance system helps to ensure very good service delivery. The fifth gear is actually the most important gear in my mind, and it talks about the development of individuals who are working with young children. You know that the quality of any institution, be it the greatest universities in the world, be it major corporations, or be it a creche, is conditioned on one thing. And it's the same thing. It's the quality of the workforce. Without quality and well-trained teachers, we can never expect to have high-quality settings. And indeed, we need to make sure that there are assurances that will enable teachers to be well-trained. Sometimes these come in the form of requirements by the government. Sometimes they come in the form of voluntary certification, whatever we need to do. The sixth gear, formative assessment. It is very important as a part of teacher training that teachers know how to observe and record children's behavior. I am not talking about formal testing. I want to be very clear about that. The only way we can plan for children's individual growth is if we informally observe their behavior, plan activities based on that data that helps let them improve, and then relook at their performance again. So the ongoing formative review of children's behavior is critically important. The seventh gear, parents and community. Young children need to have their parents engaged. It is not as though we are dealing with children who have made many adjustments away from home. Young children are experiencing settings with other children, maybe for the first time. They need the support of their parents. And parents equally need to know that our institutions, to whom they are giving their most precious thing, their children, indeed will honor their culture, will respect their diversity, and indeed will pay homage to the things that are important to that family. The last gear, linkages to schools and community health settings. There is a wonderful story. How many of you have ever taught young children? Yeah, good, good. All right. Well, you tell me if I am right or wrong. When you are dealing, and this goes if you have not taught, if you have a young child of your own. If you have a very young child, say a child who is 3 or 4 years old, and you go to read a story to that child, is it not true that the child will want that same story read over and over and over again? You know this, yes? Yes, yes. They love, it drives us silly as grown-ups, but young children want that. If you did that same thing to a child who was, say, 8 or 9 years old, what would they say? They would say, I need a new book. I've read that, that's old. Why? Why is this? Why is this, and worldwide, why is this a phenomenon? It is what every learning theorist has told us, that children from 0 to about age 7 or 8 learn in ways that are very different from children who are age 8 and above. Young children learn by repetition. They crave it, they need it. They learn by hands-on. They learn by getting involved. And so we need to be sure that what we are advancing as appropriate pedagogy for children birth to age 5 also somehow really sustains and grows with them as they move into elementary schools. It is very important, and it is very, very hard to do. This last year, links with schools and links with community and health settings is a critical ingredient for quality. And finally, to end with my wish. What is my wish? It is that this wonderful country of Brazil will be surrounded with all of the things that make for high quality for very, very young children. We need it for all children, and we need all gears. I thank you for your attention. You've been wonderful, and I thank again the inviters.